December 15, 1943. Commander Takeshi Yamamoto thought his submarine was invisible, lurking 25 kilometers from the American destroyer. His sonar operator heard nothing, just ocean silence. Then the depth charges started falling. For 2 years, Japanese submarine crews had been dying, convinced they were being hunted by supernatural forces. American destroyers were detecting them from distances their own sonar said were physically impossible. The Japanese Navy's most experienced captains were being sunk before they even knew enemy ships were nearby. When Yamamoto was finally captured and saw American sonar equipment for the first time, he realized something terrifying. Japan hadn't just underestimated American industrial power, they had fundamentally misunderstood the laws of physics themselves. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. December 15th, 1943. The Pacific Ocean stretched endless and dark under the morning sun. Commander Takeshi Yamamoto stood inside his submarine, the I-174, watching his crew work at their stations. The metal walls around him felt cold and damp. Salt water dripped from pipes overhead. The air smelled of diesel fuel and sweat. Yamamoto had been a naval officer for 15 years. He knew these waters better than most men knew their own homes. His submarine was one of Japan's finest, nearly 400 feet long and armed with the best torpedoes the empire could build. The crew of 70 men had trained together for 2 years. They moved through the narrow corridors like dancers who knew every step. But something was wrong in the Pacific, something Yamamoto could not understand. 3 months ago, Japan controlled much of the ocean. Their submarines hunted American ships like wolves hunting sheep. The Imperial Navy had told them they were winning. The Emperor's forces would soon control all the seas from Tokyo to California. American sailors were weak and afraid. The Japanese spirit would overcome their machines. Now, in December 1943, everything had changed. Japanese submarines were disappearing. The I-162 vanished near Guadalcanal. The I-185 never returned from patrol. The I-203 sent one last radio message about enemy destroyers, then silence forever. Every week brought news of another submarine lost. The worst part was how they died. Not in glorious battle, face to face with enemy warships. They simply vanished. One day they were there, the next day gone. No distress calls, no final torpedo attacks. Just an empty ocean where proud submarines used to be. Yamamoto walked through his submarine, checking on his men. In the engine room, Chief Petty Officer Watanabe wiped grease from his hands. The diesel engines ran quietly, but fuel was running low. Japan could no longer send supply ships safely across the Pacific. Every drop of fuel had to last longer than before. In the torpedo room, sailors cleaned their weapons with extra care. Each torpedo cost more than a house in Tokyo. There were no spare parts for broken equipment, no replacement tubes if something went wrong. What they had now was all they would get. In the galley held enough rice for 10 days. Before the war, submarines carried fresh fish, vegetables, and even sake for special occasions. Now the cook counted every grain of rice. The men were always hungry. Their uniforms hung loose on thin bodies. But the strangest changes were not about food or fuel. They were about the enemy. Lieutenant Sato, the executive officer, had served on merchant ships before joining the Navy. He had seen American ports in peacetime. He remembered Americans as soft people who cared more about money than fighting. They would surely break when faced with Japanese determination. That was 3 years ago. Now Sato studied intelligence reports that made no sense. American factories were building ships faster than Japan could sink them. New destroyers appeared every month. Their radar systems could see through darkness and bad weather. Somehow, American sailors had become dangerous hunters instead of easy prey. In the sonar room, Petty Officer Hiroshi Tanaka sat with headphones covering his ears. He was 22 years old, trained at the Navy's best listening school. His job was to hear enemy ships before they heard him. Japanese submarines stayed hidden by moving quietly and listening carefully. Tanaka's equipment could detect propeller sounds from about 2 kilometers away. On a very quiet day with perfect conditions, maybe 3 kilometers. The Navy's training manual said this was enough. Japanese submarines were supposed to get close to their targets, close enough to see the whites of enemy sailors' eyes before firing torpedoes. But lately, something impossible kept happening. Enemy destroyers were finding Japanese submarines from much farther away. Much, much farther. Last month, the I-156 was detected and attacked from over 8 kilometers away. The submarine escaped, barely, with damage to its hull. The captain reported that American depth charges started falling before his sonar operator heard anything at all. How could the enemy see them when they could not see the enemy? 2 weeks ago, the I-189 was hunted by destroyers that seemed to know exactly where it was hiding. The American ships moved in perfect formation, like they were following a map. They dropped depth charges in a precise pattern, as if they could see through the dark water to the submarine below. The I-189 survived only because its captain was brave enough to surface and fight with deck guns instead of hiding. The strangest report came from Commander Ito of the I-165. His submarine was attacked from 15 kilometers away. 15 kilometers! Tanaka had checked the numbers 3 times. No listening equipment could work at that distance. Sound waves in water simply did not carry that far. It was like saying someone could see through mountains or hear whispers from the next city. Yamamoto had served in the Navy since 1928. He had studied every textbook about submarine warfare. He understood the physics of sound in water. He understood how sonar worked. What the American destroyers were doing was impossible. Yet it kept happening. This morning, Yamamoto's submarine patrolled 25 kilometers south of Guadalcanal. The water was deep and cold, perfect conditions for hiding. His sonar operator heard nothing but ocean currents and distant whales. The surface was empty of ships. Everything seemed safe. Tanaka adjusted his headphones and listened harder. The American destroyers had to be out there somewhere. Intelligence reports said they patrolled these waters every few days. But his equipment detected nothing. No propeller sounds, no engine noise, just the normal sounds of a peaceful ocean. Yamamoto studied his charts. According to Japanese naval doctrine, his submarine was invisible at this distance. Enemy ships would have to come within 3 kilometers before their listening equipment could find him. At 3 kilometers, he would hear them first and have plenty of time to escape or escort. The Americans were probably 20 or 30 kilometers away, if they were there at all, much too far to be dangerous. His submarine could surface safely, recharge its batteries, and get fresh air for the crew. After 3 days underwater, the men needed a break. But something felt wrong. Yamamoto had learned to trust his instincts after 15 years at sea. The ocean felt different now, too quiet, too empty, like the moment before a typhoon strikes when all the birds disappear and the wind stops blowing. He walked back to the sonar room. Tanaka still heard nothing unusual. The young petty officer was skilled and careful. If enemy ships were nearby, he would detect them. Japanese training was the best in the world. Their listening equipment might be simple, but their ears were sharp. Yamamoto made his decision. They would stay submerged and continue patrol. Better to be safe than sorry. The crew could wait another day for fresh air. Then the first depth charge exploded. The submarine shook like a toy in an earthquake. Light bulbs shattered. Men fell against metal walls. The sound was louder than thunder, louder than anything Yamamoto had ever heard. Water sprayed from loose pipe joints. Emergency alarms began screaming throughout the boat. Tanaka ripped off his headphones, eyes wide with shock. He had heard nothing, no propeller sounds, no engine noise, no warning at all. The enemy had appeared like ghosts, like spirits rising from the deep ocean itself. More explosions followed, closer now. The American destroyers were attacking with deadly precision. They knew exactly where the Japanese submarine was hiding. They could see through 25 kilometers of dark water as clearly as looking through glass. Yamamoto grabbed the communication tube and shouted orders to dive deeper. The submarine tilted downward, racing toward the ocean floor. Maybe they could escape into the deep water where depth charges could not reach. But as more explosions thundered around them, Yamamoto realized something that chilled his blood more than the cold Pacific water. The Americans were not guessing where to drop their weapons. They were not searching blindly through the ocean. They knew exactly where his submarine was located, down to the meter. How was this possible? What did the enemy possess that could see so far and so clearly? And if American technology was this advanced, how many other Japanese submarines had already died without ever knowing what killed them? The I-174 limped away from the attack site, diving deeper into the cold Pacific darkness. Commander Yamamoto's hands shook as he studied the damage reports. 3 small leaks in the hull. 1 torpedo tube was damaged beyond repair. 2 men injured from flying metal pieces. They had survived, but barely. The most frightening part was not the damage, it was the questions that had no answers. Petty Officer Tanaka sat in the sonar room, staring at his equipment like it had betrayed him. His headphones lay silent on the metal table. For 6 hours after the attack, he had listened to nothing but ocean sounds. No propeller noise, no engine rumble. The American destroyers had vanished as mysteriously as they had appeared. Yamamoto found him there at midnight, still awake, still confused. "What did you hear before the attack?" Yamamoto asked quietly. "Nothing, sir," Tanaka whispered. "Absolutely nothing. The ocean was empty. Then suddenly, depth charges were falling all around us." Yamamoto nodded slowly. He had read the reports from other submarine captains. The same story every time. No warning sounds, no detection of enemy ships. Just sudden, deadly attacks from impossible distances. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. 3 days later, radio messages from Naval Headquarters brought worse news. The I-182 had been sunk near Rabaul. The I-211 was missing somewhere north of the Solomon Islands. Both submarines had experienced the same mysterious attacks. Enemy ships appear from nowhere, attacking with perfect accuracy, then disappearing again. Lieutenant Sato brought intelligence reports to Yamamoto's small cabin. The papers were thin and yellowed, copied by hand because Japan could no longer waste paper on printing. The reports contained fragments of information gathered from various sources. Captured American documents, statements from rescued Japanese sailors, observations from surviving submarine crews. "Sir, look at this," Sato said, pointing to one report. "The Americans have something called active sonar. Our intelligence officers do not understand what it means." Yamamoto read the document carefully. The captured American manual mentioned sonar systems with ranges exceeding 15 kilometers. But the technical details made no sense. The Americans wrote about sending sound waves through water and listening for echoes that bounced back, like shouting into a canyon and hearing your voice return. This was completely different from Japanese sonar. Their equipment only listened, it never made sounds. Japanese submarines stayed hidden by remaining silent and detecting enemy noise from far away. The idea of making loud sounds to find other ships seemed backwards and dangerous. If they make noise to find us, why can we not hear them making the noise? Sutton shrugged. The report does not explain that, sir. More intelligence arrived the following week. A Japanese pilot, shot down near Guadalcanal and rescued by fishermen, had spent 2 days hiding near an American naval base. He reported seeing strange activities on enemy destroyers, large dish-shaped objects mounted on their masts, sailors wearing headphones staring at green screens covered with glowing dots. The pilot had drawn pictures of what he saw. The devices looked nothing like Japanese sonar equipment. They were huge, complex machines with thick cables and rotating parts. The American sailors seemed to watch their screens constantly, pointing and talking excitedly when dots appeared. "They can see ships on those screens," the pilot had written, "ships that are many kilometers away. The dots move across the green surface like tiny fish swimming in an aquarium." Yamamoto studied the pilot's drawings. If these reports were true, American technology was not just better than Japanese equipment, it was completely different. It worked on principles that Japanese engineers had never imagined. But the most shocking news came from an unexpected source. A Japanese merchant captain, captured when his supply ship was sunk, had been held prisoner on an American destroyer for 3 weeks before being transferred to a prison camp. During that time, he had watched the American sonar operators work. The merchant captain's report, smuggled back through neutral diplomats, contained details that made Yamamoto's blood run cold. American sonar could detect submarines at ranges up to 30 kilometers. 30 kilometers! The number seemed like a mistake, but the merchant captain insisted he had seen it himself. The Americans would point their equipment in different directions, sending out invisible sound waves. When the waves hit a submarine and bounced back, dots would appear on their screens. Even worse, the American equipment could tell how deep the submarines were hiding. It could measure their exact speed and direction. The sonar operators could track multiple submarines at the same time, watching their movements like a hawk watches mice in a field. The merchant captain described one attack he had witnessed. The American destroyer detected a Japanese submarine from 28 kilometers away. The sonar operators tracked it for 2 hours, calling out its position every few minutes. When the submarine tried to dive deeper, they knew immediately. When it changed course, they followed its new direction on their screens. The attack itself lasted only 15 minutes. The Americans moved their ship into perfect position, calculated exactly where to drop depth charges, and destroyed the submarine without ever seeing it with their eyes. The entire crew of the Japanese submarine died without knowing they had been hunted from such an impossible distance. Yamamoto read this report 3 times. If it was true, Japanese submarine warfare was not just difficult, it was hopeless. They were fighting an enemy that could see them from farther away than they could see the enemy. Every patrol was like walking naked through a forest filled with hidden hunters. 2 weeks later, more proof arrived. The I-156, damaged in an earlier attack, had managed to capture a small piece of American sonar equipment when they sank a damaged destroyer. Japanese engineers had examined the device for days, trying to understand how it worked. Their report was frightening in its simplicity. American sonar was not just better than Japanese equipment, it was based on completely different science. Instead of only listening for sounds, it created its own sounds and listened for echoes that bounced back. Like clapping your hands in a cave and hearing your voice return. The American device could send out sounds much stronger than anything Japan had ever built. These waves traveled through water at exactly 1,500 meters per second. When they hit a submarine and bounced back, the American equipment calculated the time delay by measuring the time delay. If the echo took 20 seconds to return, the submarine was exactly 15 kilometers away. But the science behind this was what truly shocked the Japanese engineers. The Americans understood sound in water better than Japan's best scientists. They had built machines that could focus sound like a telescope focuses light. They could aim their sonar in specific directions, sweeping back and forth across the ocean like a searchlight piercing through darkness. Japanese sonar could only hear sounds that other ships made accidentally. American sonar could create its own sounds and use them to hunt submarines actively. It was the difference between waiting for lightning to illuminate the night and carrying a powerful flashlight that never ran out of batteries. The technical report included drawings of the captured American equipment. The device was smaller than Japanese sonar, but infinitely more complex. Hundreds of wires connected electronic parts that Japanese engineers had never seen before. The Americans had invented new types of tubes, circuits, and amplifiers that made their machines incredibly sensitive and powerful. One section of the report made Yamamoto feel sick to his stomach. The captured American device was marked as Standard Equipment Type SG-6. This was not experimental technology or a secret weapon. It was regular equipment that every American destroyer carried. The enemy had mass-produced sonar systems more advanced than anything in the Japanese Navy. Even worse, the serial number on the device indicated it had been manufactured in 1942. The Americans had possessed this technology for over a year. While Japanese submarines were being mysteriously destroyed throughout 1943, the enemy had been using superior sonar to hunt them like fish in a barrel. Yamamoto realized that every Japanese submarine captain had been fighting a war they could not win. They had trained for close-range battles using equipment designed for short distances. Meanwhile, their enemies possessed long-range detection systems that made Japanese training obsolete. It was like bringing swords to fight men with rifles. The implications were staggering. If American sonar was this advanced, what other technologies did they possess? How many other Japanese weapons and tactics were useless against enemy systems they had never imagined? How many good men had died because Japan's leaders did not understand what they were fighting against? As Yamamoto's submarine continued its patrol through the dark Pacific waters, he began to understand something terrible. Japan was not losing the war because American sailors were braver or stronger. They were losing because the enemy possessed scientific knowledge that Japanese engineers had never dreamed possible. The Americans had turned the ocean itself into a weapon that could see through water and darkness as clearly as daylight on land. For the first time in his 15-year career, Commander Yamamoto wondered if Japanese spirit and determination would be enough to overcome such overwhelming technological advantages. The question haunted him as his submarine moved silently through waters where invisible enemies could watch his every move from distances he had thought were safe. January 18, 1944. Commander Yamamoto's submarine had been underwater for 6 days, hiding in the deep waters near Truck Lagoon. Food was running low. The air inside the boat smelled stale and poisonous. Men moved slowly to save oxygen. Some had already fainted from the bad air. But Yamamoto refused to surface. Intelligence reports warned that American destroyers were hunting in these waters with new equipment even more powerful than before. Every Japanese submarine that surfaced in daylight had been detected and destroyed within minutes. On the 7th day, they had no choice. The batteries were almost dead. The air was so thick that men could barely breathe. If they stayed underwater any longer, the entire crew would suffocate. At dawn, the I-174 rose slowly toward the surface. Petty Officer Tanaka sat at his sonar station, listening desperately for any sound of enemy ships. His headphones picked up nothing but the gentle lapping of waves above them. 20 meters below the surface, Yamamoto ordered the submarine to stop rising. They would stay hidden just beneath the water and extend only the breathing tube to get fresh air. It was safer than fully surfacing, though more dangerous if they needed to dive quickly. The fresh air felt like cool water flowing into their lungs. Men smiled for the first time in days. The electric motors hummed quietly as the batteries began charging from the diesel generators. Then Tanaka heard something that made his heart stop. Not the sound of propellers or engines, but something completely new. A sharp pinging noise, like someone tapping on metal pipes. The sound came from far away, but it was getting stronger. Ping, ping, ping. "Sir," Tanaka whispered, his voice shaking, "I hear something strange. It sounds like metal being struck with a hammer, but it comes from the water." Yamamoto rushed to the sonar room and put on the spare headphones. The pinging sound was clear and regular, coming every 2 seconds. It seemed to bounce off the submarine's hull and echo back into the darkness. Suddenly, Yamamoto understood. This was the sound of American active sonar. The enemy was sending sound waves through the water, and those waves were hitting his submarine and returning to their ships. Each ping told the Americans exactly where the I-174 was hiding. "Emergency dive," Yamamoto shouted, "all ahead full." But it was too late. The pinging sounds were coming from multiple directions now. 3 American destroyers had surrounded them, tracking their every movement with perfect accuracy. The sonar waves painted a clear picture of the Japanese submarine on their green screens, like a fish caught in a spotlight. The first depth charges began falling before the submarine could dive 50 meters. The explosions were more precise than anything Yamamoto had ever experienced. They detected at exactly the right depth, exactly the right distance from the hull. The I-174 shuddered under the attacks. Pipes burst, lights went out. Men screamed as they were thrown against metal walls. Water began flooding through cracks in the hull. The submarine was dying, and there was nowhere to run. After 20 minutes of precise bombardment, the attack stopped. The submarine was too damaged to dive or surface. It hung in the water like a wounded whale, neither sinking nor floating. Emergency air bubbled from ruptured tanks, marking their position for the enemy ships above. Through the periscope, Yamamoto could see American sailors on the deck of the nearest destroyer. They were not excited or celebrating. They looked calm and professional, like fishermen who had caught exactly what they expected to catch. This was routine work for them. A loudspeaker crackled from the American ship. "Japanese submarine, you are surrounded. Surface immediately, or we will continue the attack." Yamamoto faced the hardest decision of his naval career. He could order his men to fight to the death, following the samurai code that said surrender was worse than dying. Or he could save their lives and face the shame of being captured. Looking at his injured crew, breathing poisonous air in a flooding submarine, Yamamoto made his choice. He ordered the submarine to surface. American sailors swarmed aboard the I-174 as soon as it broke the surface. They were not cruel or violent. They treated the Japanese crew with efficiency and surprising kindness. Wounded men were given medical care immediately. The healthy prisoners were offered food and water. Yamamoto was taken aboard the American destroyer USS Morrison. As he walked across the deck, he saw things that shocked him more than the capture itself. American sailors looked well-fed and healthy. Their uniforms were new and clean. The ship's equipment gleamed with careful maintenance. But what stunned him most was the sonar room. An American naval officer, Lieutenant Commander James Mitchell, showed Yamamoto through the ship's detection center. Mitchell spoke some Japanese from his service in Tokyo before the war. He seemed genuinely interested in explaining how American sonar worked. The sonar room was 3 times larger than the cramped space on Japanese submarines. Electronic equipment lined every wall, humming with electric power. Green screens showed glowing dots that moved across circular displays. Operators sat at comfortable chairs, watching the screens and calling out information to other crew members. "This is how we found you," Mitchell said, pointing to one screen. A bright dot in the center represented the American destroyer. Smaller dots around it showed the positions of the other ships in the hunting group. "Your submarine appeared here, 26 kilometers away, when you came close to the surface." Yamamoto stared at the screen. The dot representing his submarine was perfectly clear and bright. The Americans had been watching him for over an hour before beginning their attack. They had known his exact position, depth, and speed throughout the entire hunt. Mitchell showed him how the active sonar worked. The American equipment sent out powerful sound pulses in focused beams. When these pulses hit objects underwater, they bounced back to sensitive receivers. Electronic computers calculated the distance, direction, and size of whatever the sound waves had touched. "We can detect submarines at ranges up to 40 kilometers, Mitchell explained. "The equipment works day or night in any weather. We can track multiple targets at the same time and coordinate attacks between several ships." 40 kilometers! Yamamoto felt dizzy hearing the number. Japanese sonar worked at 3 kilometers on the best possible day. American technology was more than 10 times more powerful. But Mitchell was not finished with his explanations. He showed Yamamoto other equipment that Japanese intelligence had never reported. Radar systems that could see aircraft and surface ships from over 100 kilometers away. Radio equipment that could coordinate attacks between ships spread across thousands of kilometers of ocean. Navigation tools that told American captains their exact position anywhere in the Pacific. "How long have you had this equipment?" Yamamoto asked. "The basic sonar systems have been in use since 1941, Mitchell replied. "But we improve them every few months. The newest models can detect submarines at even greater ranges." Yamamoto realized that Japan had been fighting this war with completely wrong information. Japanese intelligence had reported that Americans were weak and poorly equipped. The truth was exactly opposite. American technology was years ahead of anything Japan possessed. But Mitchell was not finished with his explanations. He showed Yamamoto other equipment that Japanese intelligence had never reported. Radar systems that could see aircraft and surface ships from over 100 kilometers away. Radio equipment that could coordinate attacks between ships spread across thousands of kilometers of ocean. Navigation tools that told American captains their exact position anywhere in the Pacific. "How long have you had this equipment?" Yamamoto asked. "The basic sonar systems have been in use since 1941, Mitchell replied. "But we improve them every few months. The newest models can detect submarines at even greater ranges." Yamamoto realized that Japan had been fighting this war with completely wrong information. Japanese intelligence had reported that Americans were weak and poorly equipped. The truth was exactly opposite. American technology was years ahead of anything Japan possessed. But Mitchell was not finished with his explanations. He showed Yamamoto other equipment that Japanese intelligence had never reported. Radar systems that could see aircraft and surface ships from over 100 kilometers away. Radio equipment that could coordinate attacks between ships spread across thousands of kilometers of ocean. Navigation tools that told American captains their exact position anywhere in the Pacific. How long have you had this equipment? Yamamoto asked. The basic sonar systems have been in use since 1941, Mitchell replied. But we improve them every few months. The newest models can detect submarines at even greater ranges. Yamamoto realized that Japan had been fighting this war with completely wrong information. Japanese intelligence had reported that Americans were weak and poorly equipped. The truth was exactly opposite. American technology was years ahead of anything Japan possessed. But Mitchell was not finished with his explanations. He showed Yamamoto other equipment that Japanese intelligence had never reported. Radar systems that could see aircraft and surface ships from over 100 kilometers away. Radio equipment that could coordinate attacks between ships spread across thousands of kilometers of ocean. Navigation tools that told American captains their exact position anywhere in the Pacific. How long have you had this equipment? Yamamoto asked. The basic sonar systems have been in use since 1941, Mitchell replied. But we improve them every few months. The newest models can detect submarines at even greater ranges. Yamamoto realized that Japan had been fighting this war with completely wrong information. Japanese intelligence had reported that Americans were weak and poorly equipped. The truth was exactly opposite. American technology was years ahead of anything Japan possessed. But Mitchell was not finished with his explanations. He showed Yamamoto other equipment that Japanese intelligence had never reported. Radar systems that could see aircraft and surface ships from over 100 kilometers away. Radio equipment that could coordinate attacks between ships spread across thousands of kilometers of ocean. Navigation tools that told American captains their exact position anywhere in the Pacific. How long have you had this equipment? Yamamoto asked. The basic sonar systems have been in use since 1941, Mitchell replied. But we improve them every few months. The newest models can detect submarines at even greater ranges. Yamamoto realized that Japan had been fighting this war with completely wrong information. Japanese intelligence had reported that Americans were weak and poorly equipped. The truth was exactly opposite. American technology was years ahead of anything Japan possessed. But Mitchell was not finished with his explanations. He showed Yamamoto other equipment that Japanese intelligence had never reported. Radar systems that could see aircraft and surface ships from over 100 kilometers away. Radio equipment that could coordinate attacks between ships spread across thousands of kilometers of ocean. Navigation tools that told American captains their exact position anywhere in the Pacific. How long have you had this equipment? Yamamoto asked. The basic sonar systems have been in use since 1941, Mitchell replied. But we improve them every few months. The newest models can detect submarines at even greater ranges. Yamamoto realized that Japan had been fighting this war with completely wrong information. Japanese intelligence had reported that Americans were weak and poorly equipped. The truth was exactly opposite. American technology was years ahead of anything Japan possessed. But Mitchell was not finished with his explanations. He showed Yamamoto other equipment that Japanese intelligence had never reported. Radar systems that could see aircraft and surface ships from over 100 kilometers away. Radio equipment that could coordinate attacks between ships spread across thousands of kilometers of ocean. Navigation tools that told American captains their exact position anywhere in the Pacific. How long have you had this equipment? Yamamoto asked. The basic sonar systems have been in use since 1941, Mitchell replied. But we improve them every few months. The newest models can detect submarines at even greater ranges. Yamamoto realized that Japan had been fighting this war with completely wrong information. Japanese intelligence had reported that Americans were weak and poorly equipped. The truth was exactly opposite. American technology was years ahead of anything Japan possessed. But Mitchell was not finished with his explanations. He showed Yamamoto other equipment that Japanese intelligence had never reported. Radar systems that could see aircraft and surface ships from over one. Yamamoto closed the diary and hid it beneath his thin mattress. Tomorrow would bring more questions from American intelligence officers. They would ask about Japanese submarine tactics, training methods, and equipment capabilities. He would answer honestly, not to betray his country, but because he now understood that the war was already lost. Japan had been fighting with swords against men with rifles. The outcome was never in doubt, only the timing. September 3, 1946. The train carrying former prisoners of war pulled slowly into Yokohama Station. Black smoke poured from bombed buildings that still had not been repaired. Broken glass covered the platform where families waited for sons and husbands who had been gone for 2 years. Commander Yamamoto stepped off the train carrying a small cloth bag that held everything he owned. Inside were 3 American sonar manuals that the occupation forces had allowed him to keep, his hidden diary from prison camp, and a letter from Lieutenant Commander Mitchell explaining how active sonar worked. These items were more valuable than gold, but nobody in Japan understood their importance yet. The city looked like a graveyard. American bombs had destroyed the naval shipyard where Yamamoto had trained as a young officer. The submarine base was nothing but twisted metal and concrete rubble. Houses were built from scrap wood and pieces of old ships. Children played in the ruins, wearing clothes made from old military uniforms. But what shocked Yamamoto most was not the destruction. It was seeing American jeeps and trucks driving through the streets. The occupying soldiers used radio equipment to talk to each other across the city. Their vehicles had small radar dishes that could detect other vehicles through fog and darkness. Even the American military police carried portable radios more advanced than the communications equipment on Japanese warships. Yamamoto's wife, Keiko, met him at the station. She had grown thin during the war, but her smile was still warm and gentle. Their son, Hiroshi, was now 12 years old, tall enough to reach his father's shoulder. The boy stared at the American soldiers with curious eyes, not fear. "How was the prison camp?" Keiko asked as they walked through the ruined streets. "Educational," Yamamoto replied quietly. At home, their small house had survived the bombing, but everything inside was different. The family radio had been broken for a year because replacement parts could not be found. The kerosene heater worked only sometimes. They cooked rice on a small charcoal burner because gas lines had been destroyed. That first night, Yamamoto sat at his old wooden desk and opened the American sonar manuals. The technical drawings and mathematical formulas looked strange next to his traditional Japanese ink brushes and calligraphy paper. 2 completely different worlds of knowledge, side by side in the same small room. Keiko brought him tea and looked over his shoulder at the foreign books. "What are those?" she asked. "The reason we lost the war," Yamamoto said simply. Over the following weeks, Yamamoto tried to return to normal life. The Japanese Navy had been disbanded by the occupation government. Former officers were not allowed to work in military industries. He found a job at a small fishing company, helping repair boats that had been damaged during the war. The fishing boats used the same simple equipment that Japanese submarines had carried: basic compass navigation, primitive radio sets, sonar systems that could detect fish schools from only a few hundred meters away. Working on these boats, Yamamoto realized how far behind Japan had fallen in every area of technology. One day in October, a former colleague visited their house. Captain Sato had commanded a destroyer that was sunk near the Philippines. He had spent 18 months in an American prison camp, but he had learned nothing from the experience. The Americans won because they had more ships and planes, Sato declared, drinking sake and speaking loudly. If Japan had possessed equal numbers, our superior fighting spirit would have brought victory. Yamamoto listened quietly, then pulled out one of the American sonar manuals. He showed Sato the technical specifications. Detection range 45 kilometers. Accuracy within 10 meters. Tracking capability 12 targets simultaneously. "Look at these numbers," Yamamoto said. "Compare them to our equipment." Sato waved his hand dismissively. "Numbers do not matter. The samurai spirit cannot be measured in kilometers." "The samurai spirit is useless if your enemy can see you from distances you cannot imagine," Yamamoto replied. "We fought a war using our hearts, while they fought using their minds." Sato left angry, calling Yamamoto a traitor who had been brainwashed by enemy propaganda. But their conversation convinced Yamamoto that most Japanese leaders still did not understand why they had lost. They blamed bad luck, superior enemy numbers, or temporary setbacks. They refused to accept that American technology had made Japanese tactics completely obsolete. In November, representatives from the new Maritime Safety Agency visited Yamamoto. Japan was being allowed to operate small patrol boats for rescue operations and fishery protection. They needed experienced naval officers who understood modern equipment. The officials were skeptical at first. Active sonar seemed like magic to men who had only used passive listening equipment. Yamamoto brought his American manuals to the first meeting. He explained how sound waves could be focused like light beams. He drew diagrams showing how electronic equipment could measure time delays and calculate distances. Most importantly, he explained why sharing technical knowledge made everyone more capable, not weaker. In America, every sonar operator understands the science behind his equipment. They are encouraged to ask questions and suggest improvements. In Japan, we told our men to follow orders without understanding why. The Maritime Safety Agency ordered their first active sonar systems from American manufacturers in early 1947. Yamamoto helped train Japanese operators to use the new equipment. The difference was immediately obvious. Ships that had been invisible to old Japanese sonar appeared clearly on the American-made screens from 20 kilometers away. Young Japanese sailors adapted quickly to the new technology. They asked intelligent questions about how the equipment worked and why it was designed in certain ways. Their curiosity reminded Yamamoto of American sailors he had met during his captivity. But older officers struggled with the new ideas. They had been taught that equipment was sacred and mysterious, not something ordinary sailors should try to understand. The idea that technology could be improved by sharing knowledge with common workers seemed dangerous and unpatriotic. In 1950, when the Korean War began, American military advisors asked Yamamoto to help train Japanese maritime forces. The new self-defense force needed officers who understood modern anti-submarine warfare. Yamamoto agreed, but insisted on teaching the science behind the equipment, not just the procedures. During one training session, a young officer asked why American sonar was so much better than what Japan had used during the war. Yamamoto thought carefully before answering. The difference was not in the machines themselves, but in the thinking that created them. American engineers were taught to question everything, experiment freely, and share their discoveries with others. Japanese engineers were taught to follow tradition, avoid mistakes, and keep secrets from their own colleagues. The young officer looked confused. But keeping secrets makes us stronger, does it not? Secrets make individuals powerful, but they make nations weak, Yamamoto replied. Knowledge grows when it is shared and dies when it is hidden. That evening, Yamamoto wrote in his diary about the training session. His handwriting had changed during the years since the war. The characters were simpler and clearer, influenced by the straightforward American technical manuals he had studied. Today, I tried to explain to young officers what I learned as a prisoner. The Americans did not defeat us with superior weapons. They defeated us with superior understanding. Until Japan learns to value questions more than answers, we will always be surprised by enemies who think differently than we do. On a warm spring day in 1960, Yamamoto sat in his garden with his son Hiroshi, who was now 26 and working as an engineer for an electronics company. The young man had studied at Tokyo University, where professors encouraged students to challenge old ideas and develop new solutions. "Father, tell me again about the war," Hiroshi asked. "What was the most important thing you learned?" Yamamoto watched cherry blossoms falling from the tree above them. The flowers reminded him of the men who had died in submarines, brave sailors who never understood what killed them. "I learned that courage without knowledge is meaningless," he said quietly. "For years, we believed that the Japanese spirit could overcome any material disadvantage. We convinced ourselves that the enemy was weak and cowardly. We never imagined that Americans could develop technology that made our training and tactics completely useless." Hiroshi nodded thoughtfully. "So the real defeat was not military, it was intellectual." "Yes," Yamamoto agreed. "We lost because we refused to understand our enemy or question our own assumptions. A nation that hides from new ideas will always be surprised by them." On a warm spring day in 1960, Yamamoto sat in his garden with his son Hiroshi, who was now 26 and working as an engineer for an electronics company. The young man had studied at Tokyo University, where professors encouraged students to challenge old ideas and develop new solutions. "Father, tell me again about the war," Hiroshi asked. "What was the most important thing you learned?" Yamamoto watched cherry blossoms falling from the tree above them. The flowers reminded him of the men who had died in submarines, brave sailors who never understood what killed them. "I learned that courage without knowledge is meaningless," he said quietly. "For years, we believed that the Japanese spirit could overcome any material disadvantage. We convinced ourselves that the enemy was weak and cowardly. We never imagined that Americans could develop technology that made our training and tactics completely useless." Hiroshi nodded thoughtfully. "So the real defeat was not military, it was intellectual." "Yes," Yamamoto agreed. "We lost because we refused to understand our enemy or question our own assumptions. A nation that hides from new ideas will always be surprised by them." As the sun set over Yokohama Bay, Yamamoto could see modern ships in the harbor. Japanese vessels now carry sonar systems more advanced than anything used during the war. Young sailors operated equipment they understood completely, not mysterious devices they were forbidden to question. The contrast with wartime Japan was complete. Instead of secrecy, there was open education. Instead of blind obedience, there was intelligent curiosity. Instead of fearing foreign knowledge, Japan was eagerly learning from the rest of the world. But Yamamoto knew that the lessons went deeper than technology. The real discovery was not about sonar or radar or any specific machine. It was about how societies create knowledge and share it with their people. "Promise me something," he told his son as darkness fell over the harbor. "If Japan ever faces another crisis, remember that our greatest strength is not our weapons or our courage. It is our willingness to learn new things and admit when our old ideas are wrong." Hiroshi promised, and Yamamoto felt satisfied. The knowledge he had gained at such terrible cost would not die with him. It would live on in the minds of people who understood that true national security came not from hiding secrets, but from sharing wisdom. The war had ended 15 years ago, but its most important battle was still being fought in classrooms and laboratories across Japan. It was the battle between old ways of thinking and new ways of learning, between the fear of questions and the courage to seek answers. Yamamoto had lost his submarine and his crew, but he had won something more valuable. He had discovered that defeat could become victory if the lessons were learned completely and shared honestly. That was the real secret the Americans had taught him, more important than any sonar manual or technical diagram. Knowledge shared was knowledge multiplied, and a nation that understood this principle would never be caught by surprise again. The next morning brought unexpected visitors to Yamamoto's house. 3 former submarine commanders had traveled from different parts of Japan after hearing rumors about his American technical manuals. Captain Watanabe had survived the sinking of the I-203. Lieutenant Commander Ishida had commanded the I-156 when it was nearly destroyed by long-range sonar attacks. Commander Takeda had spent 2 years in a prisoner camp in Australia. They sat around Yamamoto's low wooden table, drinking green tea and examining the sonar manuals with fascination and horror. None of them had seen such detailed technical information during their active service. The complexity of American equipment was beyond anything they had imagined. "Look at this circuit diagram," Watanabe whispered, tracing his finger along the intricate lines. "Their sonar uses electronic tubes we have never heard of, components that amplify signals hundreds of times stronger than our equipment could manage." Ishida studied the range specifications with growing amazement. 45 kilometers maximum detection distance. We trained for battles at 3 kilometers. No wonder we never saw them coming. But Takeda asked the most important question. "Why are you showing us these secrets? The occupation authorities could arrest us for possessing enemy technical documents." Yamamoto poured more tea before answering. "Because these are not secrets anymore. The Americans gave me these manuals openly. They want us to understand how their technology works. In their military schools, this information is taught to thousands of students every year." The 3 visitors looked confused. In the Imperial Navy, technical manuals were classified documents that only senior officers could read. The idea that enemy nations would freely share their military knowledge seemed impossible. Yamamoto explained what he had learned during his captivity. American universities conducted research that was published in scientific journals anyone could buy. Engineering students were encouraged to study foreign technology and improve upon existing designs. Military contractors shared certain discoveries with civilian companies to speed up development. "They understand something we never learned," Yamamoto continued. "Knowledge becomes more powerful when more people possess it. 1,000 engineers working together will always create better weapons than 10 engineers working in isolation." Over the following months, these informal meetings grew into a larger group. Former naval officers, engineers from disbanded military factories, and university professors began gathering regularly to study American technical documents. They called themselves the Maritime Technology Study Group, though everyone understood their real purpose was to figure out why Japan had lost the technological war so completely. The discussions were painful but necessary. Every participant had to confront the gap between what they had believed during the war and what had actually been true. Japanese propaganda had claimed that American equipment was crude and unreliable. The technical manuals proved that American technology was sophisticated beyond Japanese comprehension. Professor Hayashi from Tokyo University brought additional perspective to their meetings. He had studied engineering in Germany before the war and understood how scientific research was conducted in other countries. His insights helped the group understand why Japan had fallen behind in multiple areas of technology. The problem was not lack of intelligence or resources, Hayashi explained during one meeting. Japanese engineers were as capable as any in the world, but our system discouraged the free exchange of ideas that drives innovation forward. He showed them examples from his own experience. Before the war, Japanese scientists had made important discoveries in electronics and acoustics. But these discoveries were immediately classified as military secrets. Researchers were forbidden from sharing their work with colleagues at other institutions. Progress slowed to a crawl because each group had to solve the same problems independently. Meanwhile, American and British scientists published their research in international journals. Engineers in different companies could build upon each other's work. Universities collaborated with military contractors to solve technical challenges. The result was rapid advancement in multiple fields simultaneously. Yamamoto added his own observations from the prison camp. I watched American sailors repair sonar equipment using field manuals that explained every component in detail. Our sailors were trained to follow procedures without understanding the underlying principles. When something broke, they had to wait for specialists who might never arrive. The study group began documenting their findings in a series of reports intended for the new Japanese government. Their goal was to ensure that future leaders would understand how technological superiority had determined the war's outcome. But they faced resistance from officials who preferred simpler explanations for Japan's defeat. In 1952, when Japan regained sovereignty, Yamamoto was invited to address a conference of maritime self-defense force officers. The speech he prepared would become one of the most important presentations on military technology given in post-war Japan. Standing before an audience of 200 officers, Yamamoto began by showing them photographs of American destroyer sonar rooms taken during his captivity. The images revealed equipment that looked like something from a science fiction movie compared to Japanese wartime technology. Gentlemen, I want you to understand exactly how our submarines were hunted during the war, he said, pointing to a photograph of glowing radar screens. These devices could detect our boats from distances we thought were physically impossible. American operators could track multiple submarines simultaneously while coordinating attacks between several ships. He explained the science behind active sonar using simple language that any officer could understand. Sound waves traveled through water at predictable speeds. Electronic equipment could measure the time required for echoes to return from distant objects. Mathematics converted these measurements into precise distance and direction information. The technology was not magical or mysterious, Yamamoto continued. It was based on scientific principles that any educated person could learn. The difference was that Americans were taught to understand their equipment completely, while we were taught to use it without asking questions. The audience listened in stunned silence as Yamamoto described conversations with American naval officers during his captivity. Enemy sailors had openly discussed their sonar capabilities, confident that Japan lacked the industrial capacity to build equivalent systems even if they understood the principles. They were correct, Yamamoto admitted. We could not have mass-produced such complex electronics even if we had possessed the technical knowledge. American factories were designed for large-scale production using standardized components. Japanese workshops built equipment one piece at a time using handcrafted methods. But the most shocking revelation came when Yamamoto discussed American research and development procedures. Enemy engineers were encouraged to experiment with new ideas and share their results with colleagues. Military contractors competed to develop better solutions to technical problems. Universities received government funding to conduct research that might have military applications years in the future. While we were perfecting samurai sword-making techniques, they were inventing electronic computers. While we were maintaining traditional methods to honor our ancestors, they were creating new methods to honor their children's future. The conference concluded with Yamamoto's recommendations for Japan's new maritime forces. The self-defense force should adopt American-style training that taught sailors to understand their equipment thoroughly. Technical manuals should explain not just how to operate devices, but why they worked and how they could be improved. Most importantly, Japan should encourage international cooperation in scientific research instead of trying to develop everything independently. These ideas gradually became official policy for Japan's post-war military forces. By 1955, Japanese maritime patrol boats carried sonar systems more advanced than anything used during World War II. Young officers studied technical manuals that explained complex electronics in clear, simple language. Training programs encouraged sailors to ask questions and suggest improvements to existing procedures. The transformation was remarkable, but Yamamoto understood it would take a generation to complete. Old attitudes about secrecy and tradition died slowly. Some senior officers still believed that sharing technical knowledge with ordinary sailors was dangerous and inappropriate. In 1958, Yamamoto's son Hiroshi graduated from Tokyo University with a degree in electronics engineering. The young man had studied radar technology, computer science, and advanced electronics as part of his regular curriculum. Knowledge that had been classified military secrets 15 years earlier was now taught in undergraduate courses. "Father, I have been thinking about your war experiences," Hiroshi said during one of their evening conversations. "Do you think Japan will ever make the same mistakes again?" Yamamoto considered the question carefully. Modern Japan was rapidly adopting foreign technology and encouraging scientific education, but he worried about deeper cultural attitudes that might reassert themselves during future crises. "The danger is not that we will reject foreign technology," he replied. "The danger is that we will become overconfident about our own capabilities and stop learning from others. Pride can blind nations just as effectively as tradition." He pointed to the harbor, where Japanese ships now carried the most modern equipment available. Those vessels represent tremendous progress, but they also represent tremendous vulnerability. If we ever stop questioning our assumptions or challenging our methods, we will be as helpless as we were in 1943. As the 1960s began, Yamamoto often reflected on the strange journey that had brought him from the depths of the Pacific Ocean to the classrooms of modern Japan. His capture had been the worst day of his military career, but it had also been the beginning of the most important education he had ever received. The American sonar manuals on his desk had become museum pieces, replaced by newer Japanese technical documents that surpassed their wartime capabilities. But the principles they represented remained as important as ever. Knowledge shared freely, questions encouraged openly, technology developed through cooperation rather than competition. Walking through the rebuilt port of Yokohama on a spring morning in 1962, Yamamoto could see the results of Japan's transformation everywhere. Modern ships carried sophisticated electronics designed by Japanese engineers who had studied at American universities. Young sailors operated complex equipment they understood completely and were encouraged to improve. International cooperation had replaced the isolation that had made Japan so vulnerable during the war. But the most important change was invisible. It lived in the minds of people who had learned that admitting ignorance was the first step towards gaining knowledge, that asking questions was more valuable than memorizing answers, that a nation's greatest strength lay not in the secrets it could hide, but in the wisdom it was willing to share freely. Standing on the dock where he had returned from prison camp 16 years earlier, Yamamoto understood that the war's most significant battle had been fought not with weapons but with ideas. Japan had lost that battle completely, but in losing it had discovered something more valuable than victory. They had learned how to learn. The lesson would serve them well in the decades to come, as Japan rebuilt itself into a peaceful nation that led the world in technology and innovation. But it would only remain true as long as people remembered why they had been defeated and why they must never stop asking the questions that would prevent such devastating surprises in the future. Knowledge, Yamamoto had discovered, was the only weapon that grew stronger when it was shared with enemies. And wisdom, he had learned, was the only treasure that multiplied when it was given away freely to anyone willing to receive it. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.